I'd heard the stories, everyone had, about the whispering stalker, a creature that roamed the forests, stalking its prey with a slow, relentless pace. They say you hear it first, a whisper just behind you, low and coaxing, calling your name. Then you start to feel it, a presence lurking just out of sight, getting closer, always closer. The last thing you hear before it takes you is the sound of its dry, rasping breath in your ear. I'd never believed the stories, not until I found out who it really was. The truth was that it was a man in his late 20s, finding young women to murder and use for his heart's content. I found that out from my uncle, a police officer, who warned me of who my father really was and why he worked so late. O.Z. Woods. I laughed, but I wasn't really joking. I could see it in their eyes. They were already buying it, and that's when I planted the seed. You know, I said, leaning in like I was sharing some big secret, there's a place, not far from here. It's where the stalker's been spotted the most. They say you can hear it if you're quiet enough. If you listen long enough, you'll hear it whispering your name, calling you in. Mia shifted uncomfortably. That's messed up, man. Chris was more skeptical. You really think we should go looking for this thing? Sounds like a joke. I'd let that doubt settle in the air. I don't know. I think it might be worth checking out. We could hike into those woods tonight, see if we hear anything. If nothing happens, we turn back. If we hear something, well, maybe we'll be the ones to prove it's real. Mia hesitated. I'm not so sure about this. Come on, I said, keeping my voice light. It'll be fun. We're not really gonna find the whispering stalker. It's just a story, right? Mia finally gave in, probably because she didn't want to seem like the scared one. Chris reluctantly agreed too, but I could tell he wasn't fully on board. That night we met up in the woods. It was cold, the moon hidden behind clouds, casting the forest in a thick, dark blanket. We hid off the trees. I could feel the tension between us, and I knew it was the perfect time to make it real. I led the way, pretending to look for signs of the stalker, scratches on trees, disturbed ground. I let the silence grow, let the tension build. Then, I made my move. I started to whisper, just faintly at first, a low, barely audible sound, something that might be mistaken for the wind or the rustling of leaves. But it wasn't. It was me, using a recording I made a few days prior. At first, Chris and Mia barely noticed. Then, I made it louder, clearer, like a whisper right behind them. Chris, Mia. They stopped dead in their tracks. I watched as their faces shifted from confused to terrified. I let it hang in the air for a moment before I spoke again, this time a little louder. Come closer. Mia's eyes went wide. She looked around, her breath quickening. Did you hear that? Chris laughed nervously, but it was shaky. Okay, that's enough. This isn't funny anymore. I didn't stop. I couldn't. Come closer. Mia's voice was trembling. Now, please, can we just go back? But it was too late. I'd already set it in motion. In a panic, I grabbed the rope from my bag. I was quick, but calm. I had them where I wanted them. Chris tripped backward into the underbrush, and Mia froze, trying to understand what was leading. I didn't give them the chance to fight back. The forest was still. The wind had stopped. It was so quiet that all I could hear was their panicked breathing and my own. I watched as the fear set in, as they realized what was happening. The stalker wasn't coming for them. I was. It was quick, too quick. A few steps, just enough to keep them quiet, and it was over. Their bodies were heavy on the ground, their faces twisted in fear, still trying to scream but unable to. I didn't feel anything. Not guilt, not fear. Just satisfaction. I had continued what my father had to stop. I dragged their bodies deeper into the woods, making it look like the stalker had taken them. There were signs, broken twigs, torn fabric. No one would suspect me. No one ever did. The next morning, I went home. I washed the blood off my hands. I acted like nothing happened. But then, tonight, hunched, its face hidden under a dark hood. Its body was long and thin, like a twisted version of a man. And from beneath the hood, I saw its eyes glowing faintly, yellow and unblinking. The Whispering Stalker wasn't a story. It was real, and it was waiting for me. To punish me for doing its job. We lived in a small, long-past operational logging town called Kurtwood, tucked away near the mouth of a river. Every mother and father in Kurtwood told their children the same phrase as soon as they were old enough to understand what it was they were saying. The words that clung to the back of every mind in town like a parasite, echoing among the streets day after day, year after year. Beware the hungry woodsman. A sliver of a poem known to everyone in Kurtwood, and the 4 simple words were enough to keep the unruly in check. A poem some in town based their entire lives around, treating the words themselves like holy iconography. I, however, did not. Everyone my age had their beliefs and skepticism about the woodsman, yet most spent the day glancing over their shoulders or looking deep into the tree line on the edge of town, wondering if they'd angered the woodsman today. By the time I was 15, I'd heard the stories 1,000 times. Everyone my age had. Some believed them outright, weaving their lives around the warnings like talismans. Others laughed them off, but still made sure to tread lightly when they walked beneath the trees. We were always told that the woodsman lurked in the tree line, watching, waiting for someone to provoke their wrath. It was one of those oppressive summer evenings where the air felt thick enough to choke on, the humidity clinging to your skin like an unwanted jacket. I'd been kicking a rock down the cracked pavement of Main Street when I saw Tommy Carter. He was leaning against the old post office, taunting some younger kid who looked ready to burst into tears. Tommy was always a bully, and his sneering face was a constant presence in Kurtwood's narrow streets. He had it coming, or so I told myself later. I'd meant to shove him, just to get him to back off, but the moment my hands hit his shoulders, Tommy's foot caught on the edge of the cracked curb, and he went down hard. His head bounced off the pavement with a wet crack. The younger kid screamed, bolting down the street without looking back. In that moment, it felt like time froze, like everything around me crept to a halt. All I could hear was the faint rustle. "Idiot!" he rasped, his voice trembling. "You're gonna get us both killed." He stumbled to his feet. Tried to reach out a hand to help him steady himself, but he brushed me off, using the brick wall of the post office to brace himself. It was an accident," I stammered, but even as I said it, I felt the weight of the words falter. As he regained his composure, I was expecting him to lunge at me. Instead, he looked at me with more panic than anger. His usual boisterous demeanor morphed into a small dog with its tail between its legs. I glanced toward the woods, where the tall, dark pines loomed like silent sentinels. I only glanced toward the tree line, but eyes felt locked on the shadowy canopy on the edge of town. I couldn't have been looking for more than a minute, but by the time I broke my trance, Tommy was already unsteadily jogging back towards his house. I stood at the corner of the post office, unsure of what to do. Did I go to tell my parents what I had done? Tell them that I attacked Tommy and nearly him? My mind raced as I looked up and down the street, realizing just how empty and quiet everything had become. I could have sworn I saw dozens of people out and about, walking up and down the street just a moment before. Yet now, there was no one. The whispers started then, faint at first, like the rustling of wind through leaves, but unmistakably voices. They carried a cadence that made my skin crawl. Words I couldn't understand but somehow felt. My stomach churned as the air seemed to grow colder, the oppressive heat vanishing in an instant. This is bullshit, I thought, feeling my breath start to increase rapidly. It's not real, it's all bullshit. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, and with every glance, I thought I'd catch something peeking from behind a tree or the corner of one of the nearby buildings. I was not going to let a story scare me. I started to walk as fast as I could towards home, the entire time reminding myself that the woodsman did not exist. As much as I tried to tell myself I had nothing to fear, I broke into a slight jog as I got closer to home, nearing the edge of the door, causing me to bounce back a few steps towards the front steps. "What the fuck?" I muttered, under my breath, taking in more air in between each exasperated word. As I went to try the door handle again, hoping the door had somehow unlocked, I felt the sudden lurch of my stomach jumping into my throat. Immediately I could hear my heart beating louder and louder in my ears. I could see something right outside my line of sight, peering ever so slightly from behind one of the towering spruce trees on the side of my house. In a moment of fear and stupidity, I turned my head in one sharp motion, locking eyes with whatever lurked beyond the trees. Immediate regret filled my mind as I saw the 6 figures now emerge from behind the trees. Their faces were obscured by masks of bark and moss. Each looked to be carved into the same big wide smile and dark hollow eyes. Their limbs were unnervingly long, stretching an unnatural length around the thick trunk of the spruce trees. Hands tipped with claw-like fingers that looked almost like they themselves were made of burnt wood. I let out a desperate yelp as I began to shake and pull on the door violently, pounding my balled fist into it as if to punch a hole clean through. "Mom! Dad!" I started shouting, my voice wavering and breaking as the panic set in. "Elise, this isn't funny. Open the door." I looked back towards the tree line, praying and hoping the woodsmen chose to stay where they were. To my dismay, they had moved, although it was only a few feet. They were now out from behind the trees. I could hear the sound of trees creaking and groaning as if they were about to fall with every step the woodsman took. I started to throw myself into the door, using every ounce of strength I had to get inside and away from the monster that lumbered toward me. As my pleas became louder and more frantic, I heard a low, grainy voice echo from inside the house. The voice emanating from my home was that of my father. His words hammered into my skull, filling me with a sense of dread. His tone was unlike anything I'd ever heard from him. Cold, distant, almost full of malice. It was as if he was looking down upon a lamb before slaughter, unfazed by the act of dooming his own flesh and blood to these beasts that lurked in our woods. My feet were rooted to the spot, as if the very ground beneath me had risen to hold me in place. In a hissing blast, the figures drew closer, their movements unnaturally smooth, as though they floated just above the ground. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of accusatory tones that made my head pound. The largest of the woodsmen stopped just a few feet away, its hollow gaze fixed on me. Odie hunched down close enough now where I could see the patches of flesh of what was once a man, disfigured by the gnarling and twisting roots fighting every which way, bursting out from underneath his skin, bringing to life a snarling, drooling beast made of both timber and flesh. One of its hands reached out, the claws pointed toward me, letting out what I can only describe as some sort of animalistic chittering. My breath hitched as I realized it wasn't just looking, it was judging. "Please," I choked out, the word barely audible. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to hurt him, I swear." The woodsman's head tilted in a slow, deliberate motion that felt more predatory than curious. I pushed my back into the door, sinking further and further down, now mere inches from the ground. I saw the woodsman slowly extend the long, spindly fingers up towards me. I squeezed my eyes shut, heaving and clutching the sides of my face as hundreds of thoughts raced through my mind on what my fate would be at the hands of the woodsman. It was then I felt a searing pain in my shin. I let out an agonizing screech and looked towards the source as I felt my back hit the floor and the ground starting to move under me. A long wooden splinter emerged from the woodsman's hand, embedding itself deep into my leg W. If a book were written, that would be WPT. He started horrified. Discrete seconds later, the droplets bothered me, with a meaty pop, now dragging me off my porch and towards the shifting canopy of the trees. With every bump and jolt, a new flash of excruciating pain shot up my leg. From deep within my bone, like the splinter was expanding and traveling up my femur, as if roots were snaking their way up my skeleton, finding purchase in my joints. My attempts to claw at the earth, digging my nails into the dirt and roots, tearing my fingers to shreds, grasping desperately at anything that could be my salvation. I screamed out for help until it felt like I had swallowed shards of glass. It was all for nothing. If anyone had heard me, if anyone had seen me, it wouldn't have mattered. I had angered the woodsmen, and they were hungry. I watched the daylight begin to fade as I was dragged deeper and deeper into the impossibly dark forest. I had gone limp in defeat and acceptance of whatever fate awaited me. I'd given up. And as the sunlight disappeared in the deep depths of the woods, I felt myself dragged through large clusters of bramble bushes, feeling the sharp spines shred my clothes and what remained of my hope. Hearing the whispers of the woodsman now grow into a dull hum as I was dragged into whatever depths these beasts lived, I could not help but remember the poem I had so foolishly chosen to forget. Beware the hungry woodsman. Their eyes pierce through the veil, with splintered bone and hollow groan. They hunt without fail. The shadows twist, the brambles bind. No soul escapes their hold. Their whispers creep where silence sleeps, and drag you to the cold.